they are trying to learn all these systems, they may or may not have got a great handover, depending on what the situation is. And somebody who could be onboarded in probably like a month will take 3 months if you don't have the processes.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. Today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Bilwa Gulgule. She is a business process lead with Colliers International. And we just had a brief conversation before we got started in the interview, and they're going through a BPM exercise or embarking on that journey as we speak. So it'll be really interesting. I guess in previous conversations and interviews, we've talked with maybe some people that have been consulting in this area with a diverse range of organizations over 40 years. But I believe it's really important to get all the different perspectives and experiences. So Bilwa, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So what we might do to get started is I'll hand it off to you. Maybe if you could give us a bit of an introduction to yourself, more comprehensive than what I just gave. And if you wanted to start with, I guess, how you found yourself in doing process work, where that interest first came from, and then a brief timeline or history up to where you find yourself today.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Daniel. So I have been in my current role. I have been doing this for about a little over a year as a very focused business process specialist or business process lead, as my title says. So it started from when our organization started looking at implementing BPM. Or process, it's more process management as they look at it. Yeah. They started looking and because I kind of had the DNA and the background for it, that's how I came about and started doing business process management and we are implementing it. We are probably 50% in our journey. Prior to this, I have had BPM exposure, but it's more in a third person perspective. Right. So we were in my previous organizations, we have tried to, we actually had BPM as a service offering, and we were doing it so I was doing business development in that space, and we were trying to look at BPM implementation services for the US and UK markets. Right. And so that's where the initial foray into BPM and understanding BPM and that initial kind of fascination for what BPM is came through. And then, of course, for a couple of years, I didn't really get a chance to implement it. But luckily in this organization, we did have had a chance to actually implement all that information and all that business development knowledge that we kind of gained. And so that's where we are now.
That's great. Yeah. And I find that the people that kind of find themselves in these roles, I guess they're wired that way. I mean, you mentioned something before when we were talking. Yes. That it was quite interesting that people that have, I guess, a very process orientated way of looking at things, they might already be doing process work in the role that they're in, even though maybe they don't have the process manager or specialist title. Absolutely.
And I think, you're probably right. So I missed that bit, but one was, yes, that direct involvement in BPM, but there's also pretty much in any role that I've done, I think it's you already have that mindset of, how are we doing this? Is there a logical conclusion to it? Are we measuring it? So you either are a process-driven person or you're not. And I think if you are one, then you will look at implementing it everywhere. So in my previous role that I was doing as a database analyst, we started looking at, okay, let's start documenting what we're doing. Let's start documenting every little steps, and we're using systems. Okay, how are we using systems? How does something that we do affect the others in the organization. So
Right.
that link, so that's where I think, and that's probably why my organization decided to look at me, because you are generally always thinking in that direction, and it doesn't have to be a formal implementation that you're doing, but whichever role you're looking at, you are looking at documenting it. You're constantly looking at ways to improve what you're doing, whether you can do it faster, you can do it smarter. And I think that forms the base of BPM as a concept. And then, of course, how you use your tools, that becomes when you're actually implementing it for an organization,
Yeah.
those things come into play.
That's great. And I think that visibility within an organization is quite vital. You've obviously got the traditional way of looking at an organization from that sort of org chart perspective, that hierarchical level. But when we're talking about BPM and business process management, we're really talking about that, I guess, that cross-functional perspective or view that shows how the different departments and areas are working together. So talk to us a little bit about the value there in being able to see an organization from that cross-functional view, and I guess more specifically to what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So even when you look at and I think that's one of the decisions you have to take early on when you decide to do BPM for your organization, is that how do you want to do it? Do you want to do it department wise, or do you want to do it functional wise,
Right.
or you go a step further and you do it cross-functional? So you could go one of either ways, and you say, okay, let's look at all marketing. Let's look at all the processes that are in marketing. Let's look at all the processes that are in HR. And you can do that, and it actually works in certain cases. But then, and again, this is very, very specific to my organization, is that certain cases you cannot work in silos like that, because your process itself will have different departments involved, and then you can no longer say I will implement my processes department wise. They will have to be by the very nature of how the process works, they will have to be cross-functional.
Yes.
So in our organization, what we're doing is, like I said, HR, you can actually say, look at a process of applying for a personal leave. So that is a very independent process that is for employees, on how to apply for leave. So that's something that you could write independently. But in the property management, because we are a real estate firm, so in the property management function, you have your property manager, and then you have our trusts teams, and then you have our corporate accounts teams. You have your administration team, and to complete a process or a set of tasks, you have interaction between all these divisions, and that's where we started building cross-functional processes. So for us, it is a mix of pure departmental processes, as well as a combination of cross-functional processes. And then you start categorizing them as, what are the processes we're doing for all our different stakeholders. So it could be related to, let's say, again, very specific to our industry, it could be anything related to owners or anything related to tenants. So that's how you start categorizing them, and that's how you start building those processes.
Yes. Now, I'm not sure whether you were there in the early days of the decision of the Colliers International deciding to adopt, I guess, a BPM framework or methodology. But I'd be interested to know that obviously when that we have a range of people that'll be listening to this interview, whether they're senior management, whether they're on the frontline staff doing carrying out the actual processes, and obviously there are decision makers within an organization that the business case needs to be put forward to, and there needs to be buy-in from that level. Like, where would you, for an organization that is looking at adopting a BPM framework, where would, I guess, the immediate value be in that? Because obviously senior management, they're going to be asking the questions, well, what's the return on investment here? How long should we expect before we see that return? They're going to be asking these sorts of questions to make sure that the investment is worthwhile and value adding, I guess. So talk to us about, maybe there's someone that's listening right now, they're working within an organization, they want to take this idea to senior management. Maybe they're listening right now, they're gleaning a lot from what you're saying. What value, what return should they be pitching to senior management as, I guess, the immediate value that a BPM framework can bring to an organization?
So it's interesting how you say value, because you have value that can be measured, or you have the indirect value of anything. So when we say immediate, it will, well, to be absolutely honest, unless you start putting a process in place and then start measuring, you can't see the value. Right. So it's a catch-22 situation. I know you're trying to sell to your management saying, no, we need this. And then the management is saying, yes, but why do I need it? And what are you going to show? So I think the way to go about this one is the immediate value for us is not in terms of revenue.
Yep.
But I think the immediate value is more for the employees.
Right.
And their satisfaction, their ease of working. I think that's your basic first value add. Right. And that's how you need to tell them, saying that, okay, you know, we have all these disparate systems right now and processes. Look at how long a new employee takes to get onboarded. Mm-hmm. Look at how lost they are, you know, most organizations now have so many systems, right? So somebody comes on board, they're trying to learn all these systems. They may or may not have got a great handover, depending on what the situation is. And somebody who could be onboarded in probably like a month will take 3 months if you don't have the processes.
Right.
So that's a basic immediate. Can you measure it? Well, no, not in terms of revenue, but definitely if you find a new employee coming in and you just look at employee satisfaction and you say, plus there will be indirect benefits that you can measure, but look at the productivity.
Yes.
Right. If an employee being completely on board in 30 days versus 90 days. Yeah. So that's one. Then let's look at existing employees. How are you know, processes change and processes evolve. And I think if they don't, they should evolve. And then how are we communicating that change to the employees? So, you know, how quickly are they brought on board? I think BPM is a very effective way to bring along that change management for existing employees. So that's, I think, the short-term or immediate value that you can give. But if you're an organization that is pretty serious about BPM, and that's what you should actually sell to your manager, saying that, okay, let's put all of this in place, but in 6 months or a year, now let's start, okay, we've got the processes in place. Let's start measuring the time taken to do tasks. And then the costs associated with doing that task by a particular resource. And then it's easy.
Yes. Yeah.
It really is easy, because then I'll say I'm at starting point A and I've put all my processes and I say, okay, today process A takes me 10 hours with a resource that is costing me 50,000 Australian dollars a year.
Yeah.
Right. And then you obviously start calculating, and then you say, okay, maybe you're at the end line, and then you start measuring and say, okay, I have now this person has become more efficient. I mean, and that is obviously on the assumption that you've documented it, but you're trying to obviously improve. But then you start saying, yep, at year 2, this person is now taking 8 hours, and that is an absolute direct cost benefit. So so two ways of looking at it. One, the short term is always the employees. You cannot put a price on happier employees.
Yeah.
Then of course there is the cost benefit that you can do slightly later in your journey.
That's great. And I totally agree with you when you say processes should evolve. You know, some organizations, they'll document their processes and then it will sit there.
In a word.
That's right. Collect dust over years because I guess the employees, in some organizations have this mindset of like, it's all in my head. I know how to do the task, you know, and
Absolutely.
there isn't that continuous improvement, whether it's incremental or radical innovations, where you're taking a task that might take 2 weeks down to 2 days or 2 hours. But talk to us a little bit about processes evolving and I guess from that incremental versus radical perspective, and I guess where each of those I guess where both of those play a part within an organization, making those daily incremental changes as opposed to the big, I guess, innovation leaps.
Yeah. So you're right. So one of the things that has, and I think we have faced that, and I'm pretty sure any organization that's going down the BPM task has faced, is that we are looking at the same stuff that's there for the last 10 years. Templates have changed, systems have changed, but we're still using the same things. Now, which one of these that you do, whether you slowly start improving, maybe like I said, it's a 10-step process. I know it's 10 steps, and then now I'll start looking at it and say, oh, maybe 4 and 5 can be combined. So that's an incremental change, and say, or maybe this does not have to go to XYZ for approval, and or you say that, if it's only in these conditions, it goes to an approval, or else we skip the approval. So those are very tiny changes that you can implement. Or you put in templates. I think that's a fantastic, according to me, I think templates are such a quick and easy way without any cost to put in any incremental changes. So let's start templatizing. Are you calculating something every time for your customer? Let's put a template here. Right. And you're looking at a live process that's there. Pull out the template. All the formulas are done. The template works. What you will probably take like maybe 30 minutes to do, it's all done for you in 5 minutes. That's a pretty quick change. And it doesn't take a lot of efforts. It's not. So I think the incremental versus radical depends on how much money do you have as an organization, right? So, and most companies, if you've already implemented BPM, you're not going to have a lot of money. So you will have to kind of say, okay, and again, if I go to my management and say, oh, you know what, I have this brilliant idea of automating this whole task, but we just probably need to hire someone to do it, or we need to put in this add-in, and they're going to say no. I mean, so it's easy. It's not easy to get that buy-in from the management for radical improvements. I think the way to go about it is really start looking at processes, start measuring all the processes, see if you can cut down on the smaller tasks, templatize, like I said, templatize what you can, remove layers of approval and all of that, make it simpler, make it leaner. And then once you start showing those benefits, and then start looking at, okay, we think this is great, but it is really time that instead of 5 people doing this, I think we should just put a system in place that will do these things. So either you have the small, what you have now is robotic process automation, RPA, which is coming in, but that requires a little more skill set.
Yes.
So, so you either get RPA and you start automating small tasks, or then you actually look at a complete system that does all of it. So those are more the radical improvements. And I feel radical improvements, and again, this is according to me, I feel they come more in the form of system implementations,
right,
more than anything else, because unless the increased changes are not so much, but I feel that if you really want to change how your processes work, the way to do it would be through systems and integration of systems,
right,
which all again has a cost to it. So one of the things in processes is we have a lot of, and this I think is a common problem again in Australia and Europe more so, that systems don't talk to each other. So there's not a lot of system integration. So one of the outcomes of processes will be, or the results or the findings will be, we need to integrate our systems. That itself is also a radical thing, because they may not talk to each other, they may not be compatible, and then is the organization willing to put that investment to actually implement system integration. So
yes, yeah.
yeah.
Now, with obviously in implementing a BPM framework, it involves the organization. It involves people from all different levels within the organization. But how do you get that enterprise-wide adoption, that everyone is on board with it, everyone understands it? Because it's not a small thing, it's not something where you can flick a switch and then the next day everyone is thinking from a cross-functional perspective and are talking inter-department and things like that. Talk to us about how you get that buy-in. And I've had this question with a few of the other interviewees, and we've had some interesting responses about trying to make process sexy and trying to make process champions and
yes,
and people like that or I guess branding it like that to try and get people excited about something that ultimately is going to benefit them in the work that they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you absolutely hit the nail with that one, because there is so much resistance to doing something differently. And I think when you start documenting processes, invariably, even if whether you're aiming for it or not, you will find ways of doing things differently. And we have found it in so many cases. We're looking at it when we've said, oh, we've been doing this like this for 5 years. And then we're like, oh, maybe we should, it's time to look at it differently. And maybe we could just make this tweak. And even that little tweak to get accepted by others is not the easiest.
Right.
So what we did was, one was when we decided, okay, we narrowed it down and say, these are the divisions that we want to implement it for. And that was pure cross-functional. It's only now that we're going departmental, but it was more cross-functional. So what we started doing is we took people from different functions, from different teams. They're doing the same function, but they're from different teams, and we got a representative. So we actually had a workshop, and we said, let's look at what processes you'll want to work on. Let's start ranking them in terms of priority. So it has either high impact on customers, or it's a cause for revenue leakage. So, those are the two parameters. Let's start prioritizing our processes.
Right.
Okay, so we've come up with the first 10 processes, and then we started allocating processes to different team members. And these were from different functions. So you have a property manager and you have a trust accountant. And then we would start sitting together in a room and saying, yep, this is how we do things. And sorry. So then that's when people started saying, oh, because it's the first time people from different functions and different teams sat in the room discussing how they're doing things. And initially it was a little tough, but then we started going and they started going and telling their team members, hey, you know what, I had this conversation. And then they started asking around, hey, has that always been like that? Because I just came out of this meeting, and that's where the conversation started getting generated. So it was very much, I think I said this to the team, the process. We have an internal process experts team. So I said, it is really for the people and by the people.
Yes.
That's what we call. You are building it and you are going to use it. So that's the number one. We think we got early involvement of a lot of people. The workshop was more in a wider group. And then we started, you'll see, at least from a team, at least 50% of the team is already involved in making the processes. And they might work on different processes based on what they're comfortable with or what their strength is. But, and they become the process experts then. And then we tell them, how do you improve and how do you deal with, we have feedback coming in saying this could be done better, and then they are involved in it. So that's the number one way I think that's really how we try to do it. The second is, and I think partly it is a bit, we do have a good system that has helped. And so we're trying to get people to, respond more on the system. And now we're finally seeing that people are appreciating what is there.
Right.
The simple things. I think we send out so many letters as property managers, right? And we had, like, everybody has a way of writing their letters and everything, but we put in templates there saying that, okay, you want to customize it, by all means customize it, but this is what is already there.
Right.
And there were simple things, but people started, instead of like looking here and there, or I think people started looking at the system and they said, oh, it's already there and it takes me only 1 minute to customize it. And I think people are slowly starting to see the benefit.
Right.
And because the first thing they'll be like, oh no, we don't want another system to work with. But then they realize, oh, it's probably not bad,
Yep.
And we are finding it very, very useful also to roll out changes. So they are, I think, instead of getting lost in 50 emails, it's there on the systems, because, we find that all the time and saying, going forward, we're going to do this the other way. And I might have missed that email, but then now it's there. So I'm just going to go and check. So those kind of things, I think they're finally finding it very useful. So early involvement of the teams and involving as much of the team that you can to implement it, I think would be a key to adoption.
Great. And let's talk about the current climate that we're going through at the moment, because obviously it's we're sitting in the middle of the coronavirus or the COVID-19 pandemic at the moment, and it's obviously disrupting a lot of businesses. For some organisations, it's completely wiped them out. For some organisations, it's certainly making it a very challenging time, and then for others, it's actually been quite a fruitful season for them because it's just played in their to their advantage, I guess. So, but talk to me about how how BPM can play a vital or important part in a situation like we're going through at the moment.
Yeah. So absolutely, and I cannot, like I said, for us the timing was so perfect. The importance of having that BPM system in place, I think that has never been more vital than it is right now. So we have been working from home now for the last 5-6 weeks, actually 5 weeks precisely to be from today. Yeah. So initially it was so much easier for people to just turn around and say, hey, do you know how that works? Or do you know? And now, it takes a little more effort to make that call or whatever. But now people are just hopping onto the system and finding stuff like they never used it before. So they have been, I think if you already have a system in place, there couldn't have been a better time for BPM to show its full benefits than when people are working remotely from home, far away, removed from their colleagues who could be their everyday helpers. And we find that a lot. People are logging into the system more because they are looking for more reference. So if you've already had some sort of BPM implemented in your organization, you're very lucky. However, this is probably not the time that people are also, if you are a company looking at investing in BPM, I think that's one of the things that we're getting is you would probably not, an organization probably would not invest in implementing BPM at this stage, just because unfortunately it is a strategic tool, but it depends on how management sees it as an immediate benefit or a long-term benefit. So if you've already had the vision of saying, our organization has BPM, it's fine. But right now in the current situation where companies may not be doing all that well and may not have that much liquidity and cash, we probably will see a lot of BPM projects deferred.
Yes.
That's what I feel. But yeah, so definitely has an impact. It's great for companies that have already implemented, but that companies looking at implementing, I think they'll probably put it on hold.
Yeah, yep. And I guess it depends on how bad the current season is impacting the business. Because
Yeah.
certainly I've noticed a lot of organisations that are scrapping all procurement, all funding, anything like that. We need to tighten our purse strings,
Yeah.
so to speak. But then I have had a couple of conversations with organisations that all of a sudden BPM's rocketed to the top of their priority list because maybe the current climate hasn't affected them financially
Yes.
so much. But all of a sudden senior management's sitting there going like, hang on a second, everyone's working from home. How do we know what they're doing? How do we know
Absolutely.
what processes they're actually carrying out?
Yeah.
And how do we know that when we get to the end of this season and we all come back together again, that we're not going to have a huge pile of rubbish or mess that we're going to have to spend time cleaning
up. Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right there, because if you do have even a little bit of budget, you would still want to continue process management, because I mean, the emphasis on how important it is at this time it has probably never been that important before. I mean, the whole point of processes is that everyone does everything in a standardized single point of view, right? With and if you can, if you can continue doing that, that's absolutely great. But I mean, now you don't have a choice. Before it was like, oh yeah, it's great, it's probably good to have, but where do I go to?
Yes.
Where do I keep going? How can I keep calling my colleague like 5 times in a day? But I already have it here. So we can see it a lot right now where it's very important. So yeah,
that's great.
People will still want to implement BPM if they have a little bit of money, but yeah.
That's right. And there might be someone listening right now that they've obviously gleaned a lot from our conversation today. And obviously we can only fit so much within 30 minutes.
Sure.
But let's just say they're within an organization that they have that process-centric mind or way of looking at things. And they're thinking, yes, this is something that I need to, I guess, talk to senior management about. This is something that will really benefit our organization. But they still have I guess a bit of learning ahead of them, so that they can put together an appropriate business case for senior management. Where would you direct or point that person if they came to you and they said, Bilwa, I've loved what you've been talking about, but I want to learn more. Obviously there's the hands-on experience, the trial and error, but for an organization that maybe doesn't have anything, I guess, officially in place, where would you point that person that wants to learn more about BPM?
I think my go-to would be the research reports, I think. So Forrester and Gartner, there's also, I think, Markets and Markets. So if you're able to get your hands on these reports, because what they do is they give you an overview of what the BPM market has been like, but it also tells you what goes ahead.
Right.
And I think if you read enough, do a lot of research and you read enough, then you kind of get a sense of where the BPM market is heading and how it is relevant to your organization. So these reports, I think, are very useful because they have a breakdown of industries and a lot of data points that will help you make your case. The others, I think, is also look out for webinars on, I think that's been a personal learning for me, is if you can look for webinars of companies who are talking about exactly something similar like this. Companies very specifically talk about how they've implemented BPM in their organization. And if you can find, so this was still a generic interaction on BPM as a whole, but if we had a little more time, or there are companies that do a very specific, this is my organization, this is the size of my organization, how did we go about it, and very specific. So you have case studies that are relevant to your industry. And that's what I would try and look for webinars or case studies that are specific to your industry, and then try and see how you can kind of replicate that in your scenario.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's so good.
Yeah.
Well, Bilwa, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I'm sure the audience has gleaned a lot from our conversation, despite the very short time frame. But yeah, I just want to thank you for blessing us with your time.
Oh no, always a pleasure. It's great to talk about your work, and it's when it's so relevant. So I'm actually glad to have had this opportunity to discuss how we've done BPM in our organization and what BPM means to me personally. So it's been great. Thank you very much for the opportunity.